Hey everybody, welcome back into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. This is the practice report. It is brought to you by Byers Auto. That is Spitzer, Holbrook, Tim May, Jeremy Birmingham, and I'm Austin Ward. Ohio State was back in this facility for practice number 3 of spring, and the pads were on. Intensity dialing up as spring break is over, and this 4 or 5 week barrage for Ohio State really begins, and they get to work. We'll just start right there. What stood out during the brief open viewing period that we had on Tuesday morning, Berm?
I've been critical about the defensive backfield and how I feel like that's still the area that's the biggest concern. And for some reason today, watching the guys, I was like, this is not a concern anymore.
The light came on.
As long as everyone's healthy, that is a really good secondary. And I was kind of taken back by the safeties. I mean, you look out there and Josh Proctor and Lathan Ransom weren't even out there doing full drills, but there's 5 or 6 guys that I think, between Court Williams and Ronnie Hickman and Bryson Shaw and Tanner McAllister and Cameron Martinez, and then you have Andre Turrentine. You got some guys out there all of a sudden that look like they have had a little bit of a wake-up call from what happened a year ago, and to me that was the takeaway. And then you look at the corners, J.K. Johnson, right before, I don't know, maybe it's not what I thought, but it looked like right as the first drill was starting, the punt coverage, there was almost a fist fight between 2 St. Louis cornerbacks, and that was pretty exciting to see because I was like, "Oh, right, we got some juice." So maybe I misconstrued it, but it didn't look like a pleasant exchange. So I was happy to see that.
My biggest takeaway from 20 minutes we got to watch was just like the attention to detail that wasn't there when we saw the first one, because it's the first practice and everybody's just trying to get loose and get acclimated to what exactly is going on. Today you saw Ryan Day walk Keon Grays through exactly where to attack on a punt block when they're not even really going full speed. You saw Jim Knowles teaching exactly where to punch the football when you need to do that, and they were going through those kind of drills, turnover things. You saw the secondary start to hone in on some of those things. So, as everything's starting to ratchet up, they're also really honing in on everything that needs to be done, the little things, so that in 2 weeks from now, it's not even said. You just know exactly what you're doing. And I think that's where this team is going to start to make its hay this spring, is just getting those little tiny details that need to be nailed down that maybe they didn't focus on last year that caused them to slip at times. They're really focusing in on those right now.
I'm just wondering whether we're being sold a pig in the poke about this 4-2-5, because as I was telling Austin while we were waiting on Ryan Day to come in, I kept looking out there and they kept arraying the defensive backs across the field in foursomes. Cam Brown, Ronnie Hickman, Court Williams, and Denzel Burke, not to be mentioned last, but you know what I'm talking about there. And I'm just wondering, hey, maybe they're going to stay in this 4-man look. I know they're not, but I'm just being a smart aleck. But it is interesting, as we've asked Ryan Day a couple of times about this defense and it's coming along, how it's being installed and stuff. And, even he admits they haven't really seen that stand-up Leo yet, although we've seen a little bit in the drills and stuff. Mm-hmm. But are they going to be in a 4-3-4 a lot? Are they going to be mainly in a 4-2-5? Is it going to be 3.5, 2.5, 5, as I call it? I think that remains to be seen. I'm thinking we may not even see that in the spring game. I may be surprised by that.
Well, yeah, and the spring game rules are obviously a little bit different. You don't want to show a lot.
Notre Dame will be taping it.
And Jim Knowles had referenced this 2 weeks ago that they hadn't got into the Leo, although you can see the foundation being laid for that with Mitchell Melton getting work in. With Larry Johnson and the Rushman down there. Cade Stover, he's only been wearing that white jersey and working at linebacker so far. He's another guy that you pencil in as an option there. And Jack Sawyer, with his sort of versatile hybrid skills there, you think that, that even if they haven't put in the scheme, they're setting up foundationally and fundamentally for them to make that transition. And a lot of that applies to the whole defense. And I asked Ryan Day about this because one thing that I'd heard from the first 2 practices and going into this third was they can morph into different looks and post-snap adjustments, and maybe they don't want to tip any of their hand there, but Ryan Day had said that Thursday practice from a week and a half ago that Jim Knowles ran one defense for the entirety of at least one period, and over and over and over, and let them work on that till they got that down. And I think that you're going to see that go because Oklahoma State had a lot of veteran players who had been in his system for a long time. You can be more creative in that situation. We had this debate with Ohio State in the past. Were they too predictable? Well, if you don't have experienced players, you can't just expect them to know everything at a 400 graduate level and run every defense under the sun. And Ohio State ran into issues with that. And I think you're going to see them continue to add maybe not by the end of spring, but certainly once you get into August, and this defense will not look the same even on September 3rd as it might look by November.
Yeah.
This is going to have to be a process, but the key part of that is that you can run a base defense consistently, and if you have more experienced players, you're going to perform it much better anyway.
Right. What's the point of running 15 things if no one knows how to run?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you get one thing done right, move on to the next. Get one thing done right, move on to the next. Jim Knowles, as a teacher, that's what Ryan Day said about him multiple times today. He's teaching. The way he teaches, the way I see how he's teaching. That is what this is about right now. This is, for the first time in a couple of years, the installation of a defense that requires some actual, learning and some adjustments that guys haven't been through before. So I just think it's fascinating. I mean, I'll keep going back to it. I just don't know how they're going to play all these guys, not just at safety, not just at corner. Linebacker, if you're only playing 2 out there's a lot of guys. Yeah. They're defensive tackle, defensive end. Like, if you start to think about Tyler Friday back and Javonte Jean-Baptiste back and Zach Harrison back, how do you play all these guys? And to me, that's the thing with Jim Knowles, is how does he, who's never had this sort of toy chest to play with before, figure out how to deploy them all and still get the best productivity and juice out of them all.
Y'all know I was being facetious about the 4.25 thing.
Everybody
knows
serious.
that.
But I agree with you. I think that a 4.2.5 and a 4.5 is possible. I mean, I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah.
But when you look at
Like that.
I mean, that's
I like
true.
that.
I mean, it's
when you look at the defense, Austin said they ran the same thing, for one practice, and that's really interesting to me, because last year they ran the same thing for the first 2 games. It didn't work. They scrapped it and tried to put 50 different things
There's a shot.
in game 3.
Yeah.
And so then you were trying to run 15 different things, and you had no clue what you were even doing with thing 1. So when you need to get that base defense down, like, that's the biggest thing. If you can run the base defense well, we saw it in 2019. If you can run the base defense well, you can stay in the base defense. But if you can't run the base defense well, you can't even get into the other things. And so Jim Knowles knows that as well as anybody. He's a Cornell guy who coached really smart guys at Duke.
Yeah.
Like, he's a smart guy, and so he knows that he's not going to be able to teach all of these things at once. He's going to have to stick with the base. Once they get that down, he can dive into whatever he wants, because the guys will be advanced in the system enough to be able to learn other things.
I see the guy who looks good just running around out there, and I brought him up in the press conference with Ryan Day. I think Tyleik Williams, man, we got to see him flash last year, but he looks different. He looks even more physical, man. And they get him and Teron Vincent and some of these other guys really going in the middle of that defense. It changes everything. It changes the whole complexion of the thing, and even helps your defensive ends who were kind of struggled last year to get sacks, et cetera. I mean, there's a guy that I've got going to have my eye on, especially in the spring game, if he gets to go off a few times.
Well, he's a guy that, if Ohio State finds a way to properly rotate to everyone's strength, he could have a big year. He was very bad against the run last year.
Yeah.
He was explosive as a pass rusher. But as Ryan Day talked about, you can't just put a guy in there for one play at a time, generally speaking, unless you know it's a passing down.
Yeah.
Maybe you put him out there, but you have to be able to count on a kid who's 6'1", 325 pounds to stop the run.
Yeah.
And if he can't do that, then he takes away some of the things that make him valuable.
Got to have that A-gap stuffer.
And it wasn't just that. I mean, in terms of size or, being able to stop the run, that was obviously a big factor. We got a ton of questions about that in the middle of last season after he had those sacks and was starting to emerge. Why is he not playing more? Well, he wasn't able to sustain, is the word that Ryan Day used. And Mickey Marotti, we saw that on day 1 actually, with Tyleik Williams sprinting across this field with one of the defensive line quality control manager assistants. I'm not sure which role to give for that particular person, but he understands the assignment that he has to be on the field consistently and not just be able to play one pass rush down, because if he's out there, he can't stop the run, or that he can't be out there for an extended period on a drive, well, that's a problem. And that's why Ohio State didn't put him on the field as much in the second half of the season. So from 0 to 10 yards, he's one of the most athletic players on the team, according to Ryan Day. You've seen that burst. We've seen him get in the backfield and make plays and create havoc. Well, you can't just do that one time. There's not a role for that at Ohio State, especially in college football anymore, where drives might get out of hand in a hurry, and we saw how much problem is created when you have to sub as frequently as Ohio State tried to last year. So he needs to be a guy that can play 3, 4, 5 snaps in a row at the level that he's flashed in the past. Looks like he's maybe getting to that point, but it's been 3 practices, and there's a long way to go. That's a key, because we talked, there was maybe more intrigue or uncertainty with that group at defensive tackle. You don't have Haskell Garrett in there to anchor that unit anymore. there's certainly people that can do that, but
Yeah.
you've got to identify who's going to consistently do that.
Yeah, whether that's Michael Hall or Ty Hamilton stepping up, or whether it's Teron Vincent finally becoming what everybody thought he could be. I think that position is just in the absolute spotlight right now because the defensive line simply just didn't get it done at times last year. And the defensive ends, there's talent. I think with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, I don't really think and some of the guys coming back, I don't think we really have to worry about them. I think they're going to get there. The defensive tackles, though, you've got to be able to get things done in the middle because it doesn't matter who's playing linebacker. Linebacker struggled a little bit at times last year, but it doesn't matter who's playing linebacker. If there's no contact at the line of scrimmage with running backs, you're not stopping the run regardless.
Just a little bit of drills we've gotten to watch too, though. I think Mitchell Melton looks really.
Absolutely.
I think he looks in the right spot. I'm talking about defensive end, maybe rush guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's interesting to me too because there's a project that I'm curious about keeping my own all the way up through the season opener next year because he could really bring just that little bit of a flash from that defensive end spot, that Leo spot, because they're going to get to that. We all know they're going to get to that. That's part of Jim Knowles' DNA. But I'm really curious to watch him progress.
I said it 2 weeks ago when we were here for the first practice. I hope people out there like listening to a conversation about defense because we are not going to talk about the Ohio State offense this entire spring. There's just not a lot. They're really good. Everyone's good. That's it, right? Like, what else can we say about the offense that we didn't say all last year, or the last 2 years when the defense was embarrassing?
Well, but we're curious about Paris Johnson.
I'm not. I mean,
I'm not either.
He's going to be an All Big Ten tackle.
Yeah, I know, but it was funny. It was funny today in the press conference. You're like,
mark it down.
Can he make that switch from guard to tackle? That's what he's played his whole year, except last year. Enoch Vimahi is an interesting guy because Ryan Day hinted that this guy could contend for a possible, playing time starting job thing. So that on the interior part of the guard spots, that's an interesting thing to watch too.
That's where the only offensive intrigue that I see is you got a new position coach. Every offensive lineman in the room gets a fresh start. The five seem to be quite identified. Who exactly is going to start there? That's pretty much settled.
With Fryer out for the spring and with Harry Miller no longer in the program, Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones will be the starting guards.
So we don't have any questions about the starters, but then the only offensive intrigue I really have is who's Justin Frye going to rely on to be the backups? Because that tells you what the future of the offensive line looks like.
Sure.
And like I said, with a new offensive line coach, you've got fresh starts for all these guys. And so whatever Greg Studrawa out of them, maybe Justin Frye thinks something else. And so the two deep is more interesting than anything on the offensive line. Other than that, this offense is going to be awesome.
Yeah, that appeared to be today based on the way they went through the lineup. You had Ben Chrisman at right tackle, Enoch Vimahi was at right guard, Jacob James was at center. Who else do we have in there? Left guard and left tackle. Zen was at left tackle. I'd have to go back and check the notes for one more to go. But that was Josh Fryer is going to be one of those guys too, based on everything we've heard. Possibly that sixth swing guy. He can play guard or tackle. We'll see how all that transpires. Not on paper, you don't look at it as experienced or as veteran as the Ohio State offensive line was last year, but it didn't quite gel for them the way that they might have wanted.
Top-end talent this year's offensive line, the starting five, is a better group than last year.
I think the pieces fit better, and we've talked about that ad nauseum about actually playing guards at guard and tackles at tackle. I think more than anything that can elevate what Ohio State can do. We'll see because they've only got through 3 practices. We'll be back in the Woody tomorrow for Ohio State Pro Day. CJ Stroud going to get to throw. That'll be intriguing for the scouts and general managers and coaches in attendance. Cardale Jones, our guy, will also be out there throwing some balls to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Can't wait for that. Ohio State then. The current roster will be back on Thursday for practice number 4, and we'll have a practice report brought to you by Byers Auto after that. That's Spencer Holbrook, Tim May, Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. Stay with us for full coverage of the Ohio State Buckeyes at LettermenRow.com.